This is Switzer Network News.
The Environmental Investigation Agency, EIA, was founded 25 years ago by a group of scrappy activists who came out of Greenpeace, who were frustrated by the bureaucracy of Greenpeace at the time. Give you a sense of kind of where we're coming from. If I had to describe kind of the guiding ethos of EIA, I would say that we're an environmental campaigning organization that advocates for innovative solutions to environmental crimes. We document trafficking and trade problems, and we look at things from a demand point of view. So we are interested in the fact that as consumers and as consumer countries, our actions and our policies have a huge impact on the ground in places where governance structures and enforcement systems and personnel just aren't strong enough to fight back necessarily against the overwhelming power of huge profits and international markets that don't ask any questions about where things come from. So by using cameras and by using our advocacy, we're trying to strengthen those efforts on the ground. So we came out of a background of documenting illegal trade in ivory, for example, that was just absolutely decimating African elephants back in the 80s. And our work on that elephant ivory trade over a several year period was instrumental in having the ban on elephant ivory. I direct our forest campaigns here in the US office. We campaign for better governance and management of the world's forests. We work to prevent forest destruction and to protect the forests and the communities and the biodiversity that depend on those forests. The way that we do that is largely through documenting illegal logging and the trade in illegally logged wood products, and looking at the impact of the supply chain when you go into forests and you cut without any attention to rules and regulations and any concern for the sustainability of logging practices. We look at sort of where that wood goes afterwards, and we bring that information to the public and to governments, in both the governments where logging is happening and governments in the consumer countries. And we campaign for action to stop this problem. We've conducted a large number of undercover investigations over the years in China, Malaysia, and Indonesia. And one of the more compelling cases that we found was cribs being manufactured from a wood called ramen. Now, ramen wood is extremely well suited to making long, narrow wood structures like pool cues or like the poles that you would use in a baby crib. Its primary habitat is the lowland peat swamps of Indonesia. Peat swamps in Indonesia are essentially the coal mines of global forests. There is no landscape on the planet that is more of a storehouse for carbon. If we destroy Indonesia's peat swamps, we are essentially releasing the single biggest source of carbon dioxide from deforestation that we could into the atmosphere. And that's exactly what we've done, unfortunately, over the last 15 years. Ramen logging is not the only cause for that, of course, but what's happened in Indonesia is you have illegal loggers go in, and this has happened on a completely systemic scale in Indonesia. They go into a peat swamp forest first to cut down the ramen. The ramen's been extracted. It gets sold into global markets where it's turned into things like baby cribs that are then sold to US retail stores and to consumers who would have no idea even to ask about that. And then that swamp forest, which is now degraded by all of the illegal logging, which is also the primary habitat of the orangutan, the single best remaining habitat in the world for the orangutans. It's now degraded, it's exposed to fire, it's exposed to being cut down and burnt for industrial scale agriculture. And you just have created this chain of destruction that leads to final forest loss of one of the most valuable forest habitats left on Earth. Illegal logging is a problem that is driven in many ways by demand coming from global markets. We need to address that problem by eliminating the demand for illegally sourced timber. Now, that is a responsibility of a number of different actors. As consumers, what we can do is always ask questions. It's by asking those questions that we create incentives for retailers and importers and suppliers of wood to also ask those questions and to make sure that they are sourcing legal and sustainable products. We also need legal frameworks that create the right incentives. And that is what EIA has been working on more than anything over the last few years. And we've actually had incredible success. The US Congress in 2008 passed a law, an amendment to a longstanding trafficking statute called the Lacey Act. The US government has now made our country the first country in the world to ban the sale of illegally sourced wood products of any sort. This is landmark legislation. It's basically sent an enormous signal into global markets that the US is closing its door on illegally sourced wood. And the ripple effects that that sends down the supply chain in terms of changing the incentives for companies to ask questions about where things come from, to not look the other way when wood is really cheap, because we all know that when you sell something off of the back of the truck, yes, it's cheap, but there's a reason for that. That's a huge impact, and we're really seeing the impact of that policy. Europe and Australia are very close to doing the same thing, and EIA has been working in those places as well. So we're seeing what might be a tipping point in terms of creating a global legal framework that really discourages trade in illegally sourced wood products.
This is Switzer Network News.